Hi, Doug community. Welcome to today's webinar on configuring Business Central for sales and use tax. I'm your host today, Kristen Hosman, and a little bit more about me. I'm currently located in Denver, Colorado, which is the home of 2024 DynamicsCon Live. I do hope to see all of you there. If you have any questions about what to expect, feel free to reach out. I'm an open book. I'm also a Microsoft MVP. My main focus is Business Central, and I also sit on the advisory committee for Doug, Dynamics User Group. You can find me online, my personal blog, different things like that by scanning that barcode there. But let's get to what we're really here for, configuring Business Central for sales and use tax. So this session, we're going to be going into a deep dive on a couple different topics within Business Central, but basically they all surround or they all entail sales tax and use tax, right? So we're going to be talking about how to configure Business Central, how to process transactions, and then how to report on those. So we're going to be looking at tax jurisdictions, tax areas, how we assign those to vendors and customers and different things like that. Also, how that is applicable to the items in your system. And then we'll look at the sales tax collected report and how that can help you with your reporting to the states that you have nexus in. So the first part of the presentation here, we're going to go through and talk about the concepts, right? And then we're going to dive deep into Business Central. So the first concept that we have is, what is a tax jurisdiction and a tax area? Well, these are the two major steps in actually setting up sales tax within Business Central. So the first thing that we need to understand is, what exactly is a tax jurisdiction? And a tax jurisdiction could be something like a city, county, state, or maybe other special tax that requires taxes within its limits. So think of like the big states, Atlanta, Minneapolis. They have these huge new stadiums going up. That could be a special tax for that specific jurisdiction. And then a tax area is going to be a physical area. So, going back to like Minneapolis or Atlanta, you're going to have an area that may have 3 or 4 different jurisdictions. It could be the city, state, county, different things like that. But that's an area, right? So if we can understand those two concepts, then we can move forward with what that looks like in Business Central. So the example that I'm going to be working off of today is an example that's near and dear to me because I live in zip code 80470. So I'm trying to have this session be something that I know, right? So in my zip code, we have 4 different jurisdictions. We have Colorado, which is a state. We have Jefferson, which is the county. And then we have 2 special jurisdictions as well, or 2 special taxes as well. So the RTD, Greater Denver, for those buses running up and down the mountain, and then the scientific and cultural facility as well. So I know I'm kind of in a bad spot here on the camera here, but I'll move myself. So you can see here that there's a minimum combined sales tax rate value of 4.5. So if we're talking about a tax jurisdiction, I'm talking about the 4 different things here that we're seeing, the Colorado, Jefferson, Greater Denver, those things, right? But the tax area is really the whole thing bundled together, right? So the tax area in this scenario is going to be 80470 at 4.5%. Okay, so now that we have an understanding of what that is, let's take a look at a snapshot of how that looks in Business Central, right? Because I opened up saying, okay, tax jurisdictions and tax areas are like the 2 big main things that we need to understand, and they really are, right? You can see here on the top part of the screenshot that the tax jurisdictions that I've set up in Business Central look like that. And then we also have tax details where you're kind of drilling in, and that's where it's coming in and looking at the tax group codes. Okay, so they all kind of tie in together, and that's how you get your reporting, and that's also how you assess tax at a customer level or maybe a vendor for use tax. Okay, so we'll dive in a little bit more in a little bit later here, but let's continue on here and talk about the tax areas. So here you can see that I set up a tax area for 80470 Pine, Colorado. And then when I click in there, I can see that I have those 4 tax jurisdictions assigned to that. We also have a couple other options in here, calculation order, different things like that. Now, I'm not a sales tax expert, so for me, I'm just not really even using the calculation order. But if you do have jurisdictions that need that, then that's going to be key, right? And then we also have that toggle there for use external tax engine. Right now I have that turned off, but that's going to be for like the Avaleras of the world and other ISV solutions that may plug into the system where you're using an outside source to help you manage your jurisdictions and your percentages and your tax areas and different things like that. Okay, so really what we're doing today is looking at the system as if you're managing it manually. Okay, so if you're a company that's selling in a ton of states and you have Nexus in a ton of states, you're probably going to use an outside tax engine to be helping you keep track of your tax jurisdictions and the tax areas and things like that. Otherwise, it's pretty manual, right? And so it could not be fun. But then we're going to look at assigning tax areas to customers. So at this point, let's go ahead and just dive into Business Central and let's take a look at how this all gets set up in Business Central. Okay. So here I am logged into Business Central, and this is actually just, bone stock Business Central. Nothing really special about it. I do have some bookmarks up here to just make it a little bit easier for the demo today, but just keep in mind you do have your global search up here, so everything that I bookmarked you can just find through the global search. But the main thing that we're going to look at first is going to be tax jurisdictions. So when we're talking about tax jurisdictions, if you remember right, in my example here, that we have 4 different jurisdictions, right? So when I'm coming into Business Central, I need to make sure that I have all 4 of those jurisdictions set up. Now, when you think about the logic on how to set these up or like the codes and different things like that, I like to tell people, go look at how you need to report to the state, because a lot of the states will have specific coding, maybe like a 4-digit code or a 3-digit code or something like that to kind of identify a jurisdiction. So if the states that you have Nexus in or that you're reporting in, if they have some sort of logic like that, then my recommendation is to, kind of copy that same logic or use that same logic within Business Central when you're doing your tax jurisdiction setup. So in my scenario here, I don't really know what those codes are for Colorado at this point, so I'm just utilizing, to the best of my ability, I'm giving it a name that makes sense, right? I'm giving it a description that makes sense as well. So I just kind of copied that right from this graph here that I took offline, and then the percentages here, which are key. You can see here that I don't have the percentages in here at this step, but there is more detailed window here for that. Okay, so what else do we have here on our tax jurisdictions? We also have our tax accounts, and we have for sales, purchasing, reverse charge, report to jurisdiction, different things like that. Now, recently, I was working with a client, and it was a client that had come to me for support, so we did not implement, or I did not implement. They were implemented by someone else, and they were telling me that their sales tax payable account was out of whack. The balances, it was a positive, it should have been a negative, it's a liability, different things like that. We were looking at the tax jurisdictions window here, and I noticed right away that their tax accounts right here, they had as their accounts payable account, which is wrong, right? This is going to be your sales tax liability account. This is going to be where you're accruing the sales tax to a liability, sits in there as a credit, and then when you make a payment to the state or the state jurisdiction, wherever, the debit's going to offset that, and then it's going to lower your liability, right? So just make sure that when you're setting this up, that you're using that sales tax payable account and not your accounts payable account, okay? And then over here, we have the report to jurisdictions. So these are going to be the local jurisdictions that you're submitting the report to. So in my example here, I have each one set up to go to its own place. However, it probably is going to look more something like this, depending on how you file and things like that. So like in this case, I'm telling the system that, hey, I report all my sales tax and use tax to the state of Colorado. And then when I file with Colorado, they're probably dispersing the money down to the counties and the special tax areas and places like that. I do know, about 10 years ago, I was filing sales tax for the state of Alabama. There were some counties that required you to file directly with that county. So in that scenario, maybe Jeffco County in this scenario requires me to file direct with them instead of going through the state. Then that could be a scenario where it would look like this. Okay. Now let's jump into the details. So you can click on any one of these lines, whatever one you click on, it is going to filter in the details window. Let me go ahead and just turn that filter off, clear that. So the tax group codes in my company, I'm just really focused on, is it taxable or non-taxable? You may work in some sort of an industry where, actually I did. I was a controller for a medical label company. And the medical labels were taxable, but the tourniquets were non-taxable. You could also have scenarios where those tourniquets may be non-taxable in one state, but taxable in another state. Something like that, right? Where it can get really complex, right? But for today's example, we're just doing easy peasy, non-taxable, taxable. Okay, so what you can see here is I have all my tax jurisdictions listed out. And then the next column here is tax group code. If I skip over a couple columns to the tax below minimum, this is where my percentages are going in. So if we go back to our PowerPoint here, we're going to see that Colorado's 2.9%, Jefferson 0.5%, and so forth, right? So you can see if the item is categorized as taxable, then it's going to be taxed at 2.9%. Okay, Jeffco here is 0.5%, right? Now, if it's a non-taxable item, then it's going to be 0%. Okay, so that's really the logic that we're utilizing here in these scenarios. Now, because we're talking about sales and use tax, I do have the tax type set up as sales and use tax. If you are only doing sales tax, go ahead and change that to sales tax only, or, use tax, excise tax, different things like that, okay? So go ahead and play around with those. Again, if you're going to play around with it, make sure you're in a test company and you're not changing this in your production company to do any testing, okay? So we're going to skip over maximum amount, tax maximum amount, and expense capitalized. Those are just some added functionality that Microsoft has in there. But for today's demo, we're just keeping it straight, pretty easy peasy. Okay. So tax jurisdictions, tax details. Now we're kind of building up, right? Now the next concept that we need to look at is tax areas, and I don't have that one bookmarked. Let's go ahead and bookmark that. But let's go into the tax area. So for me, logically, what makes sense is that I'm going to use the zip code as the code so that when I'm setting up new customers and I go to put a tax area code on there, I can just use the zip code, right? Like, to me, that just logically makes sense. It makes it seem maybe a little bit easier. But I do know that sales tax is pretty fussy when it comes to area codes. I mean, you could be assessed sales tax based on your zip code plus dash the next 4 digits, right? I'm not sure what that's called, but that last 4 digits, right? Someone on my side of the street could pay less tax than someone on the other side of the street based strictly on that dash, 4-digit number, right? So just keep that in mind. Like when you're structuring this, like maybe you do want to go down to that dash for something and just be a little bit more specific. And then we do have that use external tax engine button here again. Again, we're not going to utilize any of that. But let's go ahead and open the tax area. And here's a tax area card. So in here, we have that code, we have the description, city, state, zip is kind of logically what my mind thinks to do. What is the country? Is it US, Canada? How do we want to round tax? Do we want to round it up, down, to nearest? So I can assume here that, based on decimals that you have set up in the system, different things like that, like you may be rounding up or down. So pick which one makes sense for your company, okay? And then go ahead and map out and tell it, okay, this tax area is made up of these jurisdictions, right? So the tax area is a bucket, we're putting marbles in the bucket, those are those jurisdictions, and so forth. Now, again, I mentioned earlier, we're not really looking at the calculation order in any of these examples. But if that is applicable to you, then go ahead and put that in there as well. Now, if you have Nexus, for me, I have Nexus in Colorado, right? I would probably have, I don't know, hundreds of jurisdictions. I mean, think of all the cities, all the counties, all the special taxes, different things like that. So I'm probably going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of tax jurisdictions. And then from that, I may have, hundreds of area codes, tax areas. So you can see now how it becomes a little bit harder to manage manually. But if you don't have many tax jurisdictions and you don't have Nexus in a lot of different places, then managing sales tax in Business Central is actually kind of fairly easy, okay? So that's pretty much it configuration wise, okay? We've now configured Business Central to allow us to, start assessing sales tax and use tax. Now, the next part here is really processing it through the system. So what I mean by that is, we're going to have customers that we're selling to. We're going to have vendors that we're buying from. So now we really get into how do we process those types of transactions in the system so that at the end of the month, we have accurate reports to submit sales tax to the jurisdictions we need to. So let's go ahead and look at how we set that up. We'll start with customers first, just because it's the first one on my bookmarks list here. And I'm going to open up this Doug user, okay? This Doug user group customer card that I have, okay? Now, these fast tabs really don't mean anything to us, so I'm just going to go ahead and minimize those. And when we get down into this invoicing section, this is where we're going to tell the system, do we need to charge this customer sales tax? If so, where is their tax area? Different things like that, right? So I always start with tax area code. And again, I use the zip code because in my mind, if I'm setting up a new customer and I have their address open up here, I can just, copy, paste that in there. It works really fast, right? So we're going to use tax area code 80470. We're also going to tell the system, hey, this customer is tax liable, right? We want to charge them sales tax. Yes? Okay. So if you turn it on and you see the coloring, that means yes. So every time we sell to this customer, the system's automatically going to tell the sales quote, sales order, sales invoice, any of those types of transactions, the system's going to know that this customer is liable for their tax. Okay. So on a customer level, that's as easy as it is. Okay. Now, if you are using like a tax engine, like an Avalara or someone else, they're going to be looking at the address. And I open up this address, but really what they're looking at is the ship to address. Okay. So your ship to address is what would calculate the sales tax for those types of softwares that are maybe a bolt-on to BC. Now I have that in there, so we're going to go ahead and close that, go back to our homepage, and let's go look at vendors. So vendors, you only really need to worry about if you need to accrue use tax. Okay, so we're going to go into Dynamics User Group here. And again, I'm just going to kind of minimize and collapse these fast tabs that we don't need. Now, in this scenario for Dynamics User Group, I can see that I do have a tax area code, but they're not tax liable, right? So the verbiage here is a little goofy, but since we're dealing with the vendor, we're really talking about use tax, okay? Not the scenario where you get an invoice from the vendor and, you know, they have sales tax on there. It's not that scenario I'm talking about, right? Because you would code that a certain way on a purchase invoice. This is really applicable to use tax scenarios, okay? So in this scenario, I'm just saying, hey, Dynamics User Group, here's our tax area code. Maybe sometimes we need to accrue use tax, but maybe sometimes we don't. So I'm just going to leave that off so it doesn't default. And then, you know, if we have to accrue sales tax, we'll deal with that when we enter the invoice. That's really the thought process I have here. All right, so we got customer, we got a vendor. We've looked at both of those. Let's go ahead and take a look at the items card. Now, the items card is a little bit different, okay? And we got 3 items in the system. I'm going to go ahead and open up this Athens desk. Of course, my system would start to go slow. So excuse me. All right, here we go. I already have a couple fast tabs, just collapse, make it a little bit easier. But down in the posting section or the cost of posting fast tab, this is where we're going to focus on the item card itself. There's a tax group code, taxable, non-taxable. So if you remember earlier, when we were looking at the tax jurisdictions, we went into details to kind of just, you know, dive in a little bit more. And we told the system that for each jurisdiction, we're only assessing the percentage for the tax if it's taxable. And then if it's non-taxable, then it will default to like 0%, right? So in my scenario, I'm telling the system, hey, all my items in my item list, they could be taxed in any jurisdiction that I have Nexus in. And then if by chance, you know, a customer is exempt, that's represented on the customer card. Okay, so in this scenario, everything is taxed. Now that's it. I mean, we've configured the sales tax. We've now assigned the tax details to vendors, customers, our items. Let's take a look now at what that actually looks like when we start processing in Business Central. Okay, so I have a couple open orders out here just to make things a little bit easier here. Let's go ahead and open up order number 2. Now, this order, I've already, you know, have everything in there, make it super simple. I already have the items in here, different things like that, right? Now, in this scenario, I can see right off the bat that we have tax area codes populated. We have tax group codes populated. All of this is coming from a combination of the item card. So the item card is where the tax group code comes from. And then the customer card is where the tax area code comes from. Now that tax area code is also going to be represented down here in the invoice details section, right here, okay? Now the system is going to require you to have it at the quote unquote header level. They call this the header level. So if you ever try and post something and it says, hey, tax area code is missing from the header, but it's at the line level, that's why you need to come put it down here. Okay, that's a requirement. So this coming from the customer card, it then flows into or onto the line section. And then again, the tax group code is coming from the item card. Now, a couple things to notice here. Okay, so we have 3 lines. 2 of them are taxable. 1 of them is not. Okay, I can come in here and for any, changes that need to be made, I can just toggle that on or off. Okay, so for that example I was using earlier, maybe this item right here happens to be non-taxable in this state, right? Something like that, right? You can see here there's a column called amount including tax. So you can see that the top 2 taxable lines have tax on there. We also have a field down here called total tax, where it calculates all the sales tax that is being assessed, right? This tax liable button is always going to be turned on because we turn that on at the customer level. But let's say that this specific order is not supposed to be taxable. I can toggle that off, okay? And then when I toggle that off, it refreshes. That did take a little bit of time to refresh, and I noticed here that the total tax also did not refresh at the same time. Let me just close this. Let me reopen it, and then we're going to see here that the total tax is 0, and that's exactly in that scenario what should happen, right? Because I turned off tax liable. So at a customer level, you want to try and make the customer card be as complete as possible, right? And then you also have the ability at a transactional level to kind of manipulate it or change something if needed. If it doesn't make sense, you can just come in here and say, non-taxable, taxable, right? Let's go ahead and turn tax liable back on, and now you can see that sales tax is there again. Now, what happens? What happens when I post this? Well, let's go ahead and do a preview posting and take a look, okay? So we're going to hit the general ledger. We're also going to be hitting several subledgers, okay? So let's start with the general ledger. In the general ledger, I'm just going to put these in order. We are hitting, hopefully this sales tax. Yep, sales tax liable. We're hitting sales tax liable 4 times, okay? So in this scenario, we're hitting it 4 times because we have 4 different jurisdictions. Okay, so that's how that equates to 4. So that'll sit on the balance sheet as a liability. Later on, you're going to come and debit that credit cash when you pay it. Okay, so some of the other subledgers. So obviously, it's a customer entry. We're hitting the customer ledger. We're dealing with items, so we're hitting the item ledger. But there's something in here that is never hit unless you're hitting sales tax, which is the tax entry, okay? So this is keeping track of the tax ledger, I guess, for lack of better terms. But this is just really a ledger, a subledger that's getting hit, tracking anything and everything that has to do with sales tax, okay? And then the other 2 items are just there because we're dealing with items and we're dealing with customers, okay? So let's go ahead and post this. And just for sake of the demo, I'm just going to ship and invoice everything. Okay. Now that's the customer side. So pretty easy. Let's go ahead and process number 3. And let's make number 3, let's just turn off tax liable for this one. Now in this scenario, we still need to report the sales to the state, right? But they're going to be reported as non-taxable in this scenario. Let's go ahead and get that posted. And then let's kind of flip over and look at the vendor side, the use tax side, right? So I have 2 purchase orders out here ready to go. We have 106002 Now, in this scenario here, I have my items here. Again, the tax area code is coming from the vendor. The tax group code is coming right from the item list. There's a check mark here, though, this use tax check mark. Now, this is not exposed out of the box typically that I've seen. So in that case, I have to come up and I have to personalize and I have to add a field and then bring it in. Okay, so if it's not there for you, just go ahead and personalize and drag and drop that over there, and then it'll stay there forever. But when you personalize, keep in mind that that's a user personalization, so it's only going to affect you. It's not going to affect any of the other users in the system. If you want to update it so it affects everybody, then you want to go and do a profile rule customization to get that to stay there for everybody. Okay, so just a little tip there. But let's go ahead and tell the system, hey, we want to assess use tax on this specific item. Okay, so I'm going to go tax liable. And then because we didn't have tax liable turned on, we are going to have to update the lines. So I'll say okay. All right. And now you can see here under total tax, $11.25. Okay. So what is that exactly doing? Let's go ahead and do a preview posting. Okay. So the vendor invoice is hitting the vendor ledger for $386.25. Okay. And the tax is all hitting. Okay. But we kind of have an issue here, right? Like this total tax rate here is increasing the amount of the invoice when the invoice really shouldn't be increased, right? So we're going to go ahead and turn off tax liable, and we're going to see what happens. We're going to go ahead and do a preview posting again. Okay, we can now see that there's still a tax entry here. Okay, we still have something going on here with tax. We have right here, these are our sales tax accruals. AP is only getting hit for $375, which is correct. That is correct. So this is really what it should look like for use tax, okay? And I may have kind of been a little bit confused on the vendor card, right? Because the vendor card, that tax liable, isn't really applicable whether if they have sales tax or use tax or not. But you could turn on the tax liable if you want to report sales tax on an invoice. Okay, so let me kind of rephrase this because I can get it confused on this as well. Okay, so if you have a vendor invoice and you want to report sales tax that they're charging you on an invoice, then maybe you do turn on tax liable, and then in that scenario, the invoice dollar amount matches, right? But in this other scenario of use tax, we would want to turn tax liable off, okay? It's still going to accrue the sales tax that we need to pay the state for use tax, but we would turn that off. Let's go ahead and post this, and then we'll get to the reporting part where everything starts to come together. And then this one here, how do we want to do this one? We will make these. Okay, so in this example, the tax area code is missing. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to put in my tax area code. It's going to ask me to update the lines. I'm going to say yes. Okay, and on this one, let's make everything kind of subject to use tax, I guess, just to kind of get some more data in the subledger for us. Again, let's just look at the preview posting. We're going to see that it's hitting the tax entry. We're also coming in here and we're also accruing that sales tax too as well. Okay, so everything seems to be working. Let's go ahead and post that. All right, so everything's just kind of flowing. People are posting. At the end of the month, we're ready to go, pay our sales tax to the states that we have nexus in. The next thing I'm going to go look at is a sales tax calculated report. Okay, so this is the out-of-the-box report that looks at the tax detail, tax entry table, and it's really the only sales tax report that we have in Business Central today, which is good and bad. Okay, it's really limited is why it's bad. Okay, so there is a con there. Now, we have a report type. We can say summary, normal, or detail. We'll go ahead and look at them all, okay? Do we want to include just sales? So customer invoices posted. Do we want to include purchases? The scenario here would be vendor sent me an invoice. We made a purchase and they have sales tax on their invoice and we recorded it as such using that tax liability on the purchase invoice. Or do we want to include use tax? Okay, so let's kind of take a look at these. All right, so we're going to go summary. We're going to put a date in here. All right, so we're going to look at January 1st through today. We'll go ahead and preview. All right, so let me go ahead and just kind of maximize this for a moment. So we have 2 pages. Remember, this is summary, okay? So we're not getting into the weeds, the details, right? But we can see our tax jurisdictions here. Now, these tax jurisdictions here, we can see exempt sales, non-taxable sales, taxable sales, and then the amount of sales tax, right? So you really get pretty much all the information you need to be able to file your sales tax, right? All right, and then this Jeffco is on its own separate one because you remember early on in the tax jurisdiction window, we said that Jeffco is submitted directly to that county rather than the state. So we have 2 different pages based on the report to jurisdiction, okay? So summary. Now let's go a step further and let's look at normal. Okay, so let's go preview that. Now, maybe have a little bit more detail, right? We're seeing what's the tax group code. Is it non-taxable? Is it taxable? We still have the 2 pages based on the report to jurisdiction. But, this is another good report that you could possibly use to file, right? It has all the information on it, okay? So it's just, I think at this point, it's probably just a preference to what you want to see. Now let's go ahead and look at detail. Okay, let's see how detail looks. Now, detail is exactly what it says. I mean, we're seeing posted invoices. In this scenario, it's just posted sales invoices. So we can see here that we have 3 invoices on the 9th. This is how, they got coded across the way. $50 on this one was exempt. 50 over here was non-taxable. Were they use tax related? No. Oh, but this is cool. This is actually our customer number. So this report could potentially be helpful if you feel like there's a discrepancy in your sales tax liability, or maybe, something changed on a customer or something like that. You could come in here and start analyzing, okay? Now, it still breaks everything out by jurisdiction, so that's why we're seeing all these different, categories. And it still breaks out each report by the report to jurisdiction. So, very helpful. Now, if I'm filing sales tax, I'm probably wanting to file use tax along with sales tax at the same time, okay? So now you can go a step further and you can tell it include use tax. Now, for this example, I'm going to go to summary. Go ahead and do a preview. Okay. We're still just getting the basic information, these same 4 columns. Now, there's nothing more telling us that anything was use tax on here. So this is still good for reporting to the states. Again, these codes over here could correlate to what the codes are for your state when you file to make it a little bit easier. But this could do the job, right? Let's go ahead and change this to detail, because this is where I think the magic happens. Okay, so let me just make this a little bit bigger. But we can see here now, especially down here, we can see some purchases, right? These are vendor invoices that I posted. And we can see that these were all use tax. So this column here, use tax is yes. So this is me accruing that use tax, okay? Now, we could argue that the report could be better. Maybe purchases, shouldn't be under taxable sales amounts, different things like that. We could argue, right? But I think at the end of the day, the reporting out of Business Central can give you enough to utilize the sales and use tax module in the system to get the job done. One of the places where it actually maybe lacks a little bit, and I'm only bringing this up because I had a client ask me about it, and I think it's important. This report does not tell us the true liability owed. So like, for example, if we have $15,000 liability sitting on the balance sheet, this report is not going to tie out to that $15,000 exactly. Now, we know that some jurisdictions you have to pay monthly, some of them are quarterly, some of them are in a year, right? So that liability is never going to tie out to this report. This report is doing nothing more than telling you what you collected or what you owe for use tax. That's it. It knows nothing about when you make a payment to that jurisdiction. It's not that type of a report, okay? So, a couple tips, okay? If you're going to use the sales and use tax module in Business Central, you still may want to have some sort of an outside reconciliation in Excel that is tracking the debits and credits coming in and out for each jurisdiction. And that way you have a reconciliation of exactly what that $15,000 balance in the sales tax liability account relates to. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So again, tons of reports in here. You can filter by jurisdictions, different things like that. But pretty easy, I think. Could it be a little bit better? Sure, it could always be better. And I do know that Microsoft is open to suggestions. I've actually reached out to them in preparation of having this webinar. I have a couple thoughts on how to make it a little bit easier. I won't go into that, but I reached out to Microsoft directly, talked to the gentleman in charge of the U.S. sales tax, and he agreed to meet with me. He wants to hear my suggestions and how they can make the module even better, okay? So keep that in mind that, it's pretty basic today, but hopefully in the future, some features are added, maybe some reports are added that kind of show and tie out to the general ledger. Now, there is one more thing I want to show you that kind of confuses me, but there's a sales tax journal, okay? And in my mind, when I was prepping, I thought, oh man, like maybe this is where I tell the system that I'm making payments to those jurisdictions. Maybe this is where that report I'm talking about, tying out to the GL type thing could be beneficial, right? I'm not really sure of the purpose of the sales tax journal. Maybe to make like little adjustments, different things like that to the liability against the subledger would be nice to use the sales tax journal. But I just want to make you aware it's there. I'm not really clear what it's for. I have asked Microsoft to give me a little bit more clarification on the purpose of it. I could see the value in it if I really understood it. But you could still run sales tax, without even using the sales tax journal. Again, I think it's here just to kind of do adjustments and make little adjustments and different things like that between the GL and subledger. All right. So with that, let me just kind of fast forward here. So quick recap, we talked about assigning tax area codes to customers and vendors, what an item group tax code is, showed you, sales order, sales invoice, purchase invoice, those different types of things, right? And we covered the sales tax collected report. There are a couple tips that I just wanted to mention. The first one, I actually found this on the Microsoft website for Business Central, so I can't take credit for this. But I will say, I did not know that this functionality existed. So if you're looking at implementing a new module within the system, go to the Microsoft Learn website, look at the Microsoft documentation. Microsoft is really good about putting tips within that documentation, and that's where I found this tip. So there is a copy tax setup task within the system. So if you have an environment that has multiple companies in it and every company needs to stay in sync as far as tax jurisdictions, tax areas, different things like that, this tool copies it all from one company to another, okay? And it's actually a really easy tool to look to. It's a really easy tool to utilize, okay? So copy tax setup. Yeah. All right. So you select the company you want to go from. Okay. Now, okay, I will say this is a little bit confusing. So my company right now is called My Company. So when I do copy tax setup, it's asking me where I want to copy it from. So I have two other companies out here. Okay. So since I'm in the My Company, that's where it's going to copy into. Okay. So do you want to copy tax groups, tax jurisdictions, tax area, tax details, different things like that, right? Like you can kind of toggle on, toggle off, right? We'll go ahead and click OK. It's pretty darn quick, right? So if you're doing a lot of managing manually across multiple companies, make sure to utilize that tool. And again, I can't take credit for it because I found it right on the Microsoft website. Here's the link right here to the Microsoft website that talks about the United States local functionality. Whoops, let's go back. So make sure to go there, check it out. But again, I mean, if you're implementing a new module, always do it in a sandbox or a test environment first. Make sure that everything is working the way you want it to. Check out the Microsoft documentation to see if they have any tips in there or things like that. And then, you could always reach out if you have any questions as well. All right. Now, this was all pre-recorded. Pretty cool, huh? But I will be here very soon, live, to answer any questions that you have. And if you don't have any questions and you're getting ready to, close out, have a good day. Again, I hope to see you guys at DynamicsCon Live 2024 in Denver. Thank you.